Hello everybody, the Nameless Narcissist here once again. Simple man diagnosed with NPD, giving you the facts of narcissistic personality disorder and things that go on in my head. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. But keep in mind, I am no clinician, so I can only speak to my own experiences. So today I was having a thought. There's like this really good, I guess meme, not really meme, just like educational graphic kind of. It was basically like, oh, what people think narcissism is, and then, oh, what it actually is. And it described basically antagonistic behavior in the first group, like abuse, criminal activity, I don't know what else. It was just a bunch of very stereotypical, just bad person sort of things. And the second part of it was like the subjective suffering and some of the difficulties in functioning that people who are pathologically narcissistic had. And I got into an argument with this guy. He's like, no, it's like those other feelings are things that everyone can experience, and those first ones are defining of narcissism. And it was just really stupid, and he just wouldn't listen to reason, even though I would, link studies and disprove everything he said. But that's not the focus of this video. It did get me thinking, because after I had an argument with that guy, pointing out that, for something to be a mental illness, there has to be personal suffering and impairment in their own life. I went and watched because I spoke at a conference recently for about pathological narcissism with some really, really good speakers, some of the leading experts in the research of pathological narcissism right now, me included, obviously. Now, I'm not on their level. I did speak there though, which was really cool. Speaking of, one of the people there, I actually link some of their studies sometimes, Ella Rodingston, something like that. When talking about me after my portion of speaking, she was like, I think Jacob is one of the stereotypical American presentations of narcissism. I was like, fuck you, bitch. You should talk about cultural differences. Anyways, but I'm watching this conference, and all I can think, although they had a very similar conception of pathological narcissism as me, the entire time I am watching this, I'm just thinking, all the ideas that they are sharing are so separated and so just distinct from how almost everyone has a conceptualization of narcissism. Some of their ideas regarding narcissism are even at odds with, say, Craig Malkin or Wendy. I'm sure even Mark Edenson has some differing ideas in some of them. And it got me thinking, like, the only thing, how do any of us know what pathological narcissism is when the only thing we can really agree on about it is that the DSM criteria is fucking stupid? That's literally, like, how do we know we're all talking about a cohesive set of people and behaviors when, there are a lot of different people and most of our conceptions are so narrow, right? Because I always talk about narcissism being, dysregulation, self-esteem. What about the people like the DSM would describe, which I don't think would really describe somebody who's really suffering from a mental illness, but that is genuinely grandiose, is very haughty, and doesn't really have any personal suffering, just kind of exploits people. Should both of those be encapsulated in a conception of pathological narcissism? Or should we limit pathological narcissism to one of those? And which one's more legitimate? I mean, obviously there's not a cut and dry answer, but it made me realize that we could all be talking about different people with different sort of struggling and issues in their personal functioning. Which really makes me think how useless the term narcissism has become. Not only is it used as basically a catch-all term for anybody who's an asshole, and has evolved to a point that's not really something that could describe a mental illness. But at the same time, even when we are talking about the personal struggles that somebody like me could have, we're talking about either too specific of a group of people or a really, really wide group of people. I mean, hell, and even with me, it's like, how am I supposed to tell what narcissism is? I have one presentation, I have one set of experiences. And obviously, all the other people who I interact with, we have very similar experiences. But where do we draw a line that it becomes a different disorder? Because if you're broad enough, everyone to some degree struggles with self-esteem regulation. Everyone to some degree struggles with feelings of entitlement and saying struggle in this ways. And some people can think hierarchically, maybe not to the same extent. And it just got me thinking, like, how almost useless a lot of the things I'm doing are, more or less, because there is no cohesive group of narcissists. and I guess that's why we speak more to a dimensional model, but when are we being too broad with this and just pathologizing the human experience? And honestly, it's really bothering me. I'm like, because there has to be one overarching theme that would encapsulate narcissism and some cutoffs for what makes it pathological. Obviously, self-esteem regulation is probably and fluctuation between vulnerability and grandiosity are probably the most, I would say, the most important parts of it and how I conceptualize it. But what about somebody whose grandiose defenses are so intact that they don't really have those fluctuations? Somebody who's so lost in their grandiosity, they're not really having those. I mean, I'm sure that they, at least some unconscious level, still having those desperate attempts to regulate their self-esteem, desperate attempts for attention, and a need to self-aggrandize and show their superiority. Or on the other hand, somebody who's very much lost in the vulnerable aspects of it. They are not getting any self-esteem juice necessary to prop up any grandiose defenses. If they aren't fluctuating between those two situations, yes, there's struggles in self-esteem, right? In both instances. One's overinflated, one's not. But do those two types of people belong in the same group? Does the first one is that even a mental disorder at that point? Because we do not diagnose people based off of this need to taxonomize and to show people that it's like, oh, this person's an asshole and abuses people, therefore he has a mental illness. No, we have diagnostic criteria as a framework so that we can kind of find the characteristic struggles and have a framework for how to help these people in terms of clinical environments. When I say we, I mean not me. I just mean humanity as a whole, why these diagnostic criteria and these categories exist. Do you think, but given that's the purpose, is effectively to have a framework for how to treat people like this, even then, it's kind of worthless, because then it's like, do you think that you would treat somebody who is just completely grandiose than somebody who is completely vulnerable the same way? I would argue if you are seeing characteristic fluctuations between those two, that you can have a pretty cohesive way of dealing with it. But those two people don't even feel like they're in the same category of pathology. I guess there is grandiosity in both of them, right? The more over, I'm the best thing ever grandiosity, and then the covert, I suffer more than everybody else, nobody realizes how great I am. There's grandiosity in both of those, right? But that doesn't necessarily, but I don't think that, those are such different presentations of it. How do you address both of those in a similar way? Because with grandiosity, you're trying to access that hidden vulnerability, right? And I guess you could make the argument that the vulnerable presentations, they are hiding true vulnerability with their kind of sob stories and stuff like that. With saying look how much I've suffered, look. And that's a big thing too that I think that I would love to make a video on, is that narcissists hate pity. And so when they're talking about all these struggles and stuff, they're either using it as an excuse for why they aren't amazing, or they're expecting you to recognize that they're greater than everybody else because they have managed to overcome these struggles and be where they are, still be alive and stuff like that. Pity and compassion, and I confuse compassion for pity all the time. I hate it. But yeah, so I'm just kind of, I guess I just kind of get off my chest, because I guess I have this almost an insecurity that discussing narcissism as a construct nowadays might not be even an accurate category. It might not even encapsulate anybody, and we all might be talking about different types of people. I mean, you look at two different books of narcissism, you're probably going to get two very different ideas on what these kind of people are like. For example, Eleanor Greenberg, she describes in her book that some of her favorite patients to deal with are narcissists. And then I'm sure that there's a lot of people who think there's no way for a narcissist to be pleasant. They have to be self-aggrandizing, boastful, and domineering. And then, of course, people say the same. So I guess, I don't know. I guess it really comes down to, for me, what is the actual core of narcissism? I don't think grandiosity is the core, because, again, fluctuations in self-esteem. I would say self-esteem regulation is the core of it, but given how it can present, I guess that's a little, I don't know, it's flip. And I would never say that empathy or lack of empathy or abusive behavior is the core of it, because that's, ironically, that's kind of a narcissistic take if you want to say that those are the core features. Those are the features that affect other people. the most. These aren't the things that they're struggling with or what cause those behaviors, or external ones that may manifest because of their own personal suffering and internal experience. So I think it'd be pretty narcissistic for people to say that our characteristic struggles and the main issues with us is that. I mean, sure, and you can bring up like, oh, these are issues that do occur interpersonally that, you know, are relatively stable. I wouldn't say abuses, but, you know, lack of empathy or dismissal of others' needs. I would say that one's very common. And you could say that's central to the interpersonal functioning, but not central to the person itself. That's not helpful in terms of treatment, in terms of like getting that. Dr. Ruth says it really well, is that we are focused on, because narcissists are so focused on themselves, like they can't really empathize with other people because they're so preoccupied in that way. And I would say that could be a very characteristic way to describe it. But by addressing that, by addressing their preoccupation with themselves, some of those core features, the low self-esteem, trying to regulate that desperately, that in turn affects the lack of empathy towards others. And I don't think you'd be able to just address that lack of empathy by treating that and then not the core issues at hand. This is really hard, honestly. Really, really hard. Oh, maybe people who think that narcissism is only characterized by abuse and stuff like that, right? Maybe that's the group that this concept was meant to encapsulate. I mean, originally it wasn't, but like, yeah, now it is. Oh man, maybe I'm talking about a completely different group of people that do stuff. Maybe narcissists in terms of the DSM aren't even pathologically narcissistic, right? That's a completely different group of people. And I would agree, like, grandiose narcissism it doesn't capture the full experience of pathological narcissism. So it's hard. Especially hard since like the DSM criteria and pathological narcissism are two constructs that nowadays do not line up well at all. Especially since one is completely based off external behaviors. But yeah, I'm curious what you guys think. If you guys can think of like an actual overarching theme of narcissism that's cohesive and applies to everybody who actually need help or can be treated, etc., etc. I don't know. Per usual, I'm asking more questions in these videos than answering them, but whatever. If you like, please like, comment, subscribe, whatever. Take your fucking meds.